After throwing the spear, he starts walking toward the monster. He counts each of his steps, so he carries the first step, the second step, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, and when he gets to the seventh step, the monster has given up. The monster dies just on his 7 steps, and he acknowledges that the rumors he has heard are true. He reveals that the wooden spear he has thrown at the monster is different from regular spears. It's a spear that is laced with the bloody mamba's venomous fang that won't let his victim walk more than 7 steps once he has been bitten. He reveals that he has kept the venom when the mamba snakes have visited him as a kid and says it is a good thing that he has kept it. He can feel the energy of the Cerberus seeping into his body, and he is glad that, finally, all 3 heads in the Cerberus are dead. His issue now is how he will carry the monster back to the village. That is because the cause of the monster's death will be quite obvious. So many of the Guardian Knight who has seen him carve the wooden spear will be his witness if people do not believe him. He remembers that there is something else he must do. He knows that the Cerberus are gatekeepers that protect their territories, and the Cerberus must have been protecting its dungeon somewhere nearby. He says that a dungeon is a mysterious place that harbors treasure, and sometimes powerful monsters use them as their lair. He says that since their gatekeeper is gone, the dungeon is probably empty, and he is sure that by spreading the feces of the Cerberus, he will be able to avoid battling small monsters, so he takes some of the feces of the Cerberus. He thinks of the best way he can find the dungeon. He looks at his surrounding, and he finds dried soil, rotten leaves, and moist roots. He also sees footprints and drools. He plans that he will backtrack the footsteps of the monster till he finds the dungeon. He walks along the forest, tracking the footsteps, and he eventually sees the dungeon. He realizes that it is the dungeon Cerberus was guarding before his attack, and he recalls that he was also at that dungeon before his regression. He recalls that they will discover the dungeon in about 10 years, but by the time they find it out, it will be completely empty. But at that moment, the dungeon is not empty. He enters the dungeon, and by the gate, he can sense the mana that is underneath the rotten surface, so he is certain that the dungeon hasn't been cleared yet. However, he doesn't see any light around yet, so he realizes that the dungeon is deeper than he has thought it was. He keeps walking, and he is excited, thinking about what kind of treasures will be waiting for him inside the dungeon. As he walks further, he sees that there are veins of ruby minerals throughout the area, and he says that it must be connected to the Red All Mountain. As he gets toward a part of the mountain, he eventually sees the light. He wonders if that's the entrance to the dungeon. He enters through the path of the light, and he sees a shining crystal. He says that the dungeon's interior is bright. He feels like the mana is imbued into the ruby to emit light. He goes nearer to the crystal, and he notices that someone has been to that dungeon before him. He sees some dead skeletons there, and he notices that the injuries on the skeleton are from stabbing, and they are dried brown blood stains. He bends down to check the stains, and when he touches it, he sees that the stains are old, and it must have been a while. He sees a letter on the floor, and he picks it up. He reads the letter where the writer says it doesn't matter what his name is, but he will just call himself Cain because there is no need for him to dirty the pure white paper with his name. As he reads the letter further, he sees that the handwriting is that of the Baskervilles family, and he wonders if the dead man is also a Baskerville. The letter continues, and the writer says that he is writing the letter so that the future generation would not make the same mistake as he has done. He says the stone chambers have been talked about within the family as a legend. He says that his brother Abel and himself coincidentally came across that place, and they raided the dungeon, which consisted of countless of trials. They killed many monsters and arrived at that chamber to find the final assignment of the place. The assignment tied their feet there for a very long time, and they remained there for 3 years. He wonders how much they have wanted the treasure for them to remain there for 3 years. He feels the final assignment must be somewhere in there. He feels the assignment, but is the crystal there? He sees an inscription on the wall, and it says, when entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The writer says that he and his brother contemplated over the text for a long time. In the end, they came to a conclusion that he and his twin brother were one in their mother's womb, but when they were given birth to, they were separated into 2. So they believe that in order for them to take the dungeon's treasure, they needed to become one again, which means only one of them could leave with the treasure. After a fierce battle between the both of them, he ended up killing his brother. After killing his brother, he remained the only one left inside the stone chamber. Despite that he is already just 1, there is still no chance for him to enter the dungeon. He wonders why he couldn't take out the treasure, especially because they have gone from 2 to 1, just as the inscription has said. He is angry that after killing his brother, he still doesn't have the treasure. In his moment of regret, he decides to leave the dungeon, and he wants to tell those who are brave enough to find the place to leave immediately because there is nothing for them to obtain from that devil's den that only serves to taunt humans. After Vicar finishes the letter, he gets the conclusion, and it means that the brothers came all the way to the dungeon. They fought countless battles, and they faced countless challenges, but they left with nothing. He throws the paper away, saying that he doesn't have a twin, and the assignment is the same thing he has gotten despite that he doesn't have a twin, so that means the brothers, Cain and Abel, have misinterpreted the text. He thinks about what the words could mean and wonders what the sentence. When entering, it's one, but once inside, it's two, and when leaving, it's one could actually mean. He urges himself to think about what could be the answer because there is no dungeon that a person can't beat. He keeps thinking and looking around, and he notices something. He realizes that Cain and Abel were just unlucky, and it was because they were two that made them unable to solve the problem, and they were hindered by a fixed idea. He touches the crystal and sees it's a dark passageway and a contrasting bright stone chamber, and the answer to the riddle lies inside the dungeon. He is one when he is entering through the dark passageway, but as soon as the ruby's light casts a shadow on him, he becomes two because of his shadow, and when darkness re-enters, that is when the stone chamber's final stage will open, so the answer to the riddle is shadow. Immediately he mentions the word shadow, the dungeon opens, and the stairs show forth with fire. He laughs that the cause of the two brothers' death is the relic of the devil's den. The crystal opens, and a sword comes out. He knows the sword as the Beelzebub, and he sees an inscription that only those with the Baskervilles' blood will be able to take the Beelzebub. He looks at the sword, wondering if that's where the name Beelzebub originated from. He recalls seeing an illustration of a picture book once during the childhood of his past life. It's the inscription of the gluttonous fly called Beelzebub. The fly is an unprecedented great monster that invaded the continent in the old legends. The devil's holy constellation, also called the Seven Calamities, came with it. In order for them to stop the seven calamities, the seven families' heads stepped up to take on a devil's holy constellation, each per family, so each family takes up a constellation to fight against. And the devil's holy constellation that the first Baskerville patriarch fought against was the gluttony, Beelzebub. The remnant of the Beelzebub was stored in the lands of Baskerville, and Beelzebub's demonic energy was said to have lured monsters. He knows that story as an old legend that no one believes till now. However, that legend was true, and the blade which he has now found was later taken by the demon clans. That resulted in countless death among humans on the battlefield. But he is sure that won't happen in his new life because the sword which has caused the fight in his previous life now belongs to him. He tries to carry the sword, but he finds it difficult. He raises the sword confidently, and although it weighs his arm, he feels some impact on his hand and feels it's breaking. The impact keeps entering his body until it looks like it's disappearing. He knows the blade was made from the corpse of the devil's holy constellation, so he has lucked out to receive the Beelzebub. The fact that he has taken that great instrument in his present life makes him more confident in his skills in that life. He wonders how much stronger he will be in that life, and he is excited to know how much his life will change. He checks around the dungeon, and he feels it doesn't look like there is anything else for him to obtain there, so he decides to head back to his safe zone. As he is about to leave, he notices something and turns. He suddenly gets weak, and he falls. He wonders what is wrong with him and why he is feeling dizzy. He concludes that he is feeling hungry. He sees that the sword which has entered his body is growling, and he wonders if the sword is asking him for something to eat. He stands up and struggles to leave. He feels such a voracious hunger inside his stomach. He also wonders if his sense of smell has also been heightened because of the sword and says he thinks he is smelling something very delicious. The sword keeps dragging him back, and the sword stretches towards a part of the forest. He wonders if there is something to eat in that part of the forest. He follows the direction the sword is taking him to, and he sees the corpse of the hellhound he had killed earlier. The sword stretches out of his hand and goes to the corpse. It sucks out blood from the corpse, and he also notices that since he is absorbing the blood through the sword, he can also feel his inside reverting back to normal. He assumes the sword has been starving for a long time when he is under the crystal. He hopes that the La Rouge et La Noire mountains tree and soil, which was being dried up, wasn't because of the sword's anger. He wonders how much he is going to have to feed the sword in order to console its eating disorder. After the sword finishes eating up the monster, he returns back to Vickers' body. The status of the blade comes out. The sword is named Beelzebub, glutton of flies, and he has 3 slots of abilities. His first slot has been filled with the hemorrhage hellhound class B+ that he has eaten and stolen from his food, and his 2 other slots are still empty. He wonders if what he has just seen is the Beelzebub's inherent ability. He remembers that Beelzebub is said to possess the power to absorb the opponent's skills into its own. His absorption amount was nearly infinite, and countless people are said to have lost their abilities and turned obsolete. However, due to it being hazardous, he can only steal up to 3 abilities for the main time. The Hellhound's Hemorrhage is a skill that constantly pumps out the blood of the opponent, even through the smallest of wounds. Vicker feels if he can actually steal abilities, then he will be the best. He sees that the sword keeps trying to devour the Hellhound. He tries to caution the sword that he can't devour the monster completely because if the hellhound is too damaged, he won't be able to explain the level of the damage during the autopsy. The sword goes around, eating up every animal he has found around. At one point, Vicar has to hit him and beg him to stop. After eating as much as he can, he eventually fills his 3 ability spots. The first spot now belongs to the burn injury Cerberus A+, the second slot is to the hemorrhage Hellhound, and the third one is for high speed regeneration which he got from the sewer rat. Vicar wonders where he has gotten the high speed regeneration from, and he sees that there is a sewer rat underneath the Cerberus, and he sees that the sword has consumed the sewer rat. He feels it's a great achievement to have acquired burn injury from the Cerberus, and since thermalgia is one of the worst pain that a human can experience and it would be much worse than Hellhound's hemorrhage. He walks away, and he says now that he is done preparing all the monsters that he wants to submit for the practical examination. Then he will wait over there and rest until the examination is over. Eventually, when the examination ends, all the young hounds who completed their examination returned to Baskerville, and the evaluation of the examination followed immediately. The young hounds received a shield, sword, or even necklace as their rewards, and they were produced from parts of the monsters they hunted during their practical examination. One of the monsters that a young hound had hunted astonished all the Baskervilles that were present at the evaluation. Hugo comes there and asks them who has haunted the monster, which turns out to be the one Vicar had haunted. The butler tells Hugo that it was Vicar from the 8-year-old class that had accidentally crossed over to the restricted area during the practical examination, and he had hunted the Cerberus with the A+ rating. Hugo knows that the Cerberus is a high-ranking monster even the family guarding knights tend to avoid, so the butler tells him that according to the report he got, the monster was wounded by the barbarian tribe. On top of that, Vicar applied poison to his wooden spear. However, Hugo wonders what kind of poison could Vicar has used that was lethal enough to kill Cerberus and asks how Vicar was able to obtain that kind of poison. But the butler tells him that he has nothing more to report and that was all that was reported in the hunting journal. He says he also wanted to ask Vicar how he had done it. But Vicar returned to his hostel, stating that he was very tired and that he needed to rest. Hugo comments that Vicar is already so sly, but he refuses to take offense because he knows information is power and power is a person's worth. The butler also admits that he was sincerely shocked and that he couldn't imagine that a master that was named Van and not Lorelei will be so talented, but Hugo tells him that he doesn't know anything. He tells the butler that he isn't like the previous patriarch, and when he raises a hound, he doesn't discriminate against them based on their bloodlines. He says it doesn't matter whether the hound is from a line of royals or a line of whores as long as he has enough talent and spite. It also means that there can be mutts coming from the royal bloodlines. He asks the butler if he now understands. The butler wonders if Hugo is concerned about his second son, who's preparing for isolation training. He apologizes to Hugo for the comment he has made, and Hugo says it's fine. He tells him that he needs a mood booster, so they should summon Vicar for him. Vicar appears before Hugo, who says he heard Vicar has caught a Cerberus during his practical training. He asks Vicar how he had done it, and Vicar narrates that he kept chocolate on his wooden spear. Hugo wonders how chocolate could kill a monster, and he explains that for canon monsters, chocolate is a lethal poison. Hugo remembers that he has actually asked for chocolate earlier and asks him if that was the reason he requested for chocolate. So Vicar says yes. The butler doesn't understand how the conversation is going. He feels they are getting right into the topic without so much greeting, and the conversation is looking like one between a father and his son. Hugo asks Vicar why he didn't respond to the same question properly when the butler asks, and Vicar says the reason he hadn't responded is because the butler isn't his master. Shockingly, Hugo asks him who is his master, and he says since he belongs to the clan, the master of the clan is his master and no one else. Hugo is impressed. He tells Vicar that he has learned well, and as a reward, the corpse of the monster he has hunted will solely belong to him. And additionally, if he has a wish, he should ask, and it will be granted because he is the best student. Vicar is glad that he will finally be able to obtain what he wants. He tells Hugo that he will like to gain access to the 10,000 Epistle Library. The 10,000 Epistle Library is one of the largest libraries in the Empire. It is located deep within the heart of the Baskerville clan. Hugo wonders what he wants to enter the library for. He asks if he is aware that only the Patriarch and the second in command, along with their direct descendants, can access the library. So Vicar tells Hugo that if he doesn't get permission, then he will give up on the request. He decides that if they don't allow him, he will have to sneak in. Luckily, Hugo tells him he may enter. He tells him that when he gets there, he should read the Baskerville 6 technique, which is located within the 6th restricted zone deep inside the library. Vicar doesn't believe what is going on because the Hugo he knows won't allow a bastardized kid to read the Baskerville 6 technique. He knows there has never been a case that an illegitimate child with the Van middle name was allowed to go past the 4th technique. However, Vicar consoles himself and says it's just the 6th technique. Hugo's current cultivation level is the 7th technique, and before his regression, Hugo was able to bear 9 of his fangs. He hasn't forgotten about the life of discrimination as an illegitimate child, so in this life, he will ensure he surpasses Hugo.